Salutations, one and all, and welcome to RWBY Revisited. In this entry, let's break down the fight between Qrow and Winter in Season 3. As an aside, this sequence was the first proper introduction to both of these characters. So let's see what sort of first impression they created. As usual, we need to assess each side's objective. Winter is the aggressor here and lashes out from sheer indignation, enraged at being slighted by Qrow. I'll get to that more as we go along, but suffice it to say that this is remarkably immature behavior. Qrow fares little better in this regard. While Winter attacks first, and thus he can claim self-defense, it was obviously his intention to provoke her. Precisely why he chose to do this isn't confirmed, but he clearly has no love for Atlas and its denizens.
Yeah, I'm talking to you, Ice Queen.
Halt!
We begin with Qrow effortlessly ripping apart a pair of AK-200 model androids. Wasn't Ironwood just touting how superior these were to the previous AK-130 models? It would seem as though that speech was all bluster, as those even gave Blake and Adam pause in the Black trailer. These things just crumpled like they were made of cheap tin.
So the gaudy ship of yours in town? Guess you're here too.
I'm standing right before you.
Qrow then confronts Winter, and he appears to be drunk. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that he isn't actually drunk, and that he's putting on a show of it to deliberately agitate Winter.
You realize you just destroyed Atlas military property.
See, I mistook this for some sort of sentient garbage.
During their dialogue, Qrow makes what may be a jab at Penny, or at the very least the process used to create her. Given his open animosity towards Ironwood later in this very season, he obviously doesn't support these sorts of experiments with Aura, though that was never brought up again or properly fleshed out.
No!
You're with him! You brought him here to kill me!
Perhaps there was more to this plot point that got left on the cutting room floor. As it stands, this seems a bit out of place with everything that happens later on.
You Atlas specialists think you're so special, don't you?
It's in the title.
Well, you know what you really are? A bunch of sellouts.
Qrow also refers to the Atlas forces as sellouts. Selling out to whom? The Atlesian Council? That doesn't seem to be the case, at least not from what we've seen. Again, I suspect that this may have been a dropped plot point.
If you won't hold your tongue, then I will gladly remove it for you.
All right then. Come take it.
But Winter makes the first threat and draws her weapon. I would like to point out that they are currently in a public area surrounded by civilians. Winter, you are part of the Atlesian military. Not only that, but a Spec Ops member as well. Not only are there severe consequences for this sort of thing in the real world, but it's grossly irresponsible. It would have been one thing if Qrow had pulled a weapon first, but he didn't. It's tremendously careless for Winter to be behaving this way. Not only does this tarnish the image of Atlas's forces, but a fight could result in injury or death to bystanders. To be thrown into a fit of violence from mere words in most cases is a sign that someone is extremely immature. Be the bigger person and walk away. Words only have the power that you give them. Losing control like this only shows that the other person has you exactly where they want you. Winter dashes forward, and in many of these early seasons, characters could move at speeds that rival RWBY's semblance. This was likely either a stylistic choice, or perhaps individuals of an advanced skill level could move this quickly. I'm inclined to believe the former, as the show has demonstrated animation styles that depart from the norm to either illustrate a point or convey a feeling. Moving on though, Winter halts just before Qrow and pauses before thrusting 5 times at his head and slashing twice. The attack pattern is as follows: thrust thrust slash thrust 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 slash. I do give Winter credit on her third strike, as she doesn't withdraw her blade to wind up a slash like most media these days would do. Instead, she simply turns the blade so that her recovery from her attack can be another attack in itself. But this is why I believe that Qrow was never truly drunk, as he can effortlessly evade these strikes. Either that, or he's an incredibly highly functioning drunk. Interestingly though, his semblance never comes into play during this exchange. Either it's simply never activated, or the idea of it hadn't been created yet. It's rather sporadic in its effects, so I'm willing to concede either point on this matter. But Winter then winds back and telegraphs her next attack, which gives Qrow plenty of time to block with his own weapon. Just looking at the size of it, combined with the mechanisms it must have with all those gears, that would be quite heavy in real life. Qrow then sweeps Winter's weapon aside, and notice how he did it. He kept the tip of her sword along the base of his own. This gives him much more leverage, and thus he can properly execute that maneuver. It's a nice detail that could easily have been missed. The spin was a bit unnecessary, as Winter could have potentially recovered and struck him, but he lucked out there. Ironic, given his previously mentioned semblance of misfortune. The two have a brief standoff, and I do appreciate how they're keeping their weapons between themselves and their opponent. Too many times have I seen media that depicts a guard position as something that would require a character to move their weapon far too much to defend anything. Qrow strikes first, but he does another spin. I dislike spins, as they present a clear target for your enemy and deny you most of your ability to stop them. Any additional power you gain from that move is negligible. You're just exposing yourself. Qrow's much larger blade knocks Winter's saber out of the way, and she lunges back to avoid his next attack, though Qrow overswings and leaves himself open. If Winter had been quicker on the uptake, she could have gotten inside his effective range and struck him. That's the trade-off in melee combat. Whether it's the length of someone's limbs in a fistfight, or their weapon in armed combat, effective range is a major factor. Those with more reach have the advantage, but only if they can keep their enemy in that range. If the combatant with the lesser range can get inside the former's optimal striking distance, then they hold the advantage. Winter's blade is smaller than Qrow's, but more maneuverable. Her goal should be to get inside his range so that he can't properly use his weapon. Winter then ducks beneath Qrow's follow-up attack, then lunges back again from his third strike. Following this, she proceeds to do several back springs while Qrow slashes at her repeatedly. Really, this just makes Qrow look a bit incompetent. You see, the back springs are slower than simply lunging backwards and leave Winter far more exposed. Each time she does this, her upper and lower body need to rotate around a center point, which doesn't move much. If Qrow attacked that region, then Winter would be powerless to stop him, as her arms and weapon are in no position to retaliate. But Qrow just keeps attacking where her head should be had she been standing straight. Winter does eventually bring her blade up to intercept Qrow's, and I really like how she braced her blade by putting her offhand along its spine. Against a weapon with such absurd mass like Qrow's, the name of which is Harbinger, she would need additional leverage. Parrying might be the better strategy, but if you're going to block, then this is what you would need to do. Also, look at the guy in the back, he is getting way too into this. We then have a shot from a distance, where both parties are doing some baseball bat swings, though there is one moment where they both simultaneously turn their backs on each other. Again, you want to avoid doing this, if at all possible.
What's going on? Some crazy guy just started attacking my sister. Oh no! I would do such a bad. It's my uncle!
Weiss then has a short exchange with RWBY, though she does lie and claim that Qrow attacked first, which is objectively false. Come on, Weiss, lying isn't a good look. When we get back to the action proper, both overswing, leaving themselves vulnerable here. You want to keep your attacks controlled, otherwise you end up exposed. Winter then spins around, and the pair get into the bind for a moment. This can potentially happen with bladed weapons, as both edges will want to bite into each other. What people normally tend to do is either retract their weapon, or try to pivot it around the point of contact with their enemy's weapon. I would say that Qrow has the advantage here, as the additional mass of his weapon would make itself useful, but that's far from the only deciding factor, though he could potentially strike Winter with the pommel of his sword. Instead, he draws back and delivers an upward slash at Winter, who leans back to avoid it. Had she shifted to either side, she would then be in a position to attack Qrow, who would need a moment to recover from his overswing. That's another downside of having a weapon that large. It takes more effort to move it, and more effort to stop it or redirect it, though this position leaves both parties vulnerable. Qrow then does a big spin, and Winter blocks it with the flat of her blade. A nice move if you want to avoid the edge-to-edge contact. A good touch there. She then counters with a thrust, though Qrow deflects it, also using his hand on the spine of his blade for additional support. Winter withdraws a step before blocking Qrow's next attack. Now she's reversed the technique he used on her previously. Note that she blocks the tip of his blade near the base of hers. That gives her much needed leverage. I feel like I'm saying that word a lot.
Leverage.
She then continues to fall back, while Qrow advances. The crowd is thankfully smart enough to give them space, which is much more than the crowds around some fights I've seen. They just stand there gormlessly gawking and then are surprised when they get hit with wild flailing. Qrow overextends again, seemingly far too confident now that he's put Winter on the defensive. Notice her expression as well though. She clearly didn't expect this good of a showing from him. Qrow's lack of attention to his form finally comes back to bite him though, as he catches Winter's pommel across his chin. Strangely, she doesn't capitalize on this opening though, as Qrow has enough time to recover and mount another offensive. I really don't like how Qrow winds up here. That left him completely exposed. That would have been the perfect opportunity for Winter to close the distance and strike him just about anywhere she chose. Instead, Winter uses her semblance to launch herself skyward, and Qrow's attack strikes the ground, sending debris everywhere. Again, this could easily have injured bystanders, and further showcases just how childish this is of both parties. Qrow gives chase again, slicing through a support column. This would absolutely destroy the edge of your blade. If you don't believe me, take a knife and go smack some rocks with it. The edge will get ruined very quickly. Qrow raises his weapon, expecting an attack, but Winter misdirects him by instead flipping over his head. Misdirection can be a powerful tool. It's a large part of how I could spar effectively against opponents who had a size advantage over me. Seriously, many of those guys were over 6 feet tall. You need strategy to counter their reach advantage. Qrow does another horrendous overswing, and Winter lands on the flat of his oversized blade. She then kicks him in the face as she leaps away, and I knew a guy at my old job who would have paid a handsome sum for that experience. Winter then leaps from a banister, and Qrow then proceeds to shoot at her.
What? What the f?
We could say that they were holding back with melee so that they didn't inflict lethal wounds, but guns can do no such thing unless specialized ammo is involved. That was a killing move. Also, rule 1 of gun safety. Never aim it at something you don't want dead. This could easily have been a killing blow. Things have just escalated exponentially. Winter then proceeds to run straight up a wall while evading gunfire, and Qrow jumps up to the mirroring structure in a single leap. These abilities haven't been seen in the following seasons, and are honestly somewhat jarring when you've gotten used to the Season 4 and onward style of animation. Qrow then continues to open fire, and another rule of gun safety is to always confirm not only where your target is, but what's behind it. Those projectiles that miss are going to continue to travel until they hit something, be it the ground or someone unlucky enough to be in the way. Qrow could have possibly killed someone if they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Irresponsible is putting this mildly. He finally seems to hit his mark though, and stops to admire the dust cloud that's formed. Fortunately for everyone involved, Qrow didn't commit first-degree murder, and Winter leaps at him, releasing a dagger from inside her saber. While I approve of dual-wielding, this configuration would mean that Winter's sword doesn't feature a proper tang. For those not aware, a tang is the base of the sword blade that extends through the grip and into the pommel. Many modern sword-like objects may look like swords, but they don't have a true tang and thus will break off if you attempt to use them like a sword. If you're looking to buy a sword, remember to check the specifications. If these sorts of things aren't mentioned, then it's likely that the seller is trying to pass off junk as the real deal. But Winter's attack blasts both of them backwards, resulting in the walkway below shattering and sending more harmful chunks of debris everywhere. The two then meet blades again, though Winter isn't capitalizing on having two weapons. Strike from different angles or at different times to catch your opponent out. Attacking from the same direction at the same time defeats the purpose. Winter then counters Qrow's next strike with an X block, though it's difficult to tell whether she's supporting her sword with the dagger or just catching Qrow's blade between her own. The former is an acceptable reaction, but the latter has the same problems as striking with both blades in the same direction at once. The advantage of dual wielding is that you can catch an enemy with either simultaneous or swiftly followed strikes from opposing angles, or to catch their weapon and strike with your other one while they are unable to respond. Winter's current method accomplishes neither. Both then leave themselves exposed for a moment before Qrow retaliates, swatting aside Winter's sword, though he overswings once again. Winter narrowly evades his next attack as they dart this way and that, which does make it difficult to discern precisely what's going on. Winter then tries to use both of her weapons again to force Qrow's away, but as I said, this accomplishes little that a single blade by itself couldn't. Qrow does go sliding back though, and slows himself by digging his blade into the walkway. Okay, that would obliterate his blade. At that point, he'd have little more than a metal paddle instead of a sword. Winter then jabs her own sword into the ground, and I feel pain on behalf of those poor blades. They don't deserve this. She then summons miniature Nevermore through her semblance, and this is one of the few times she behaves like Weiss does in the later seasons, remaining inert while summoning. In later seasons, she's much more mobile, while Weiss often stands around helpless while summoning. These Nevermore don't seem to do much, just orbiting Qrow as he stands there, though Winter does smirk for some reason. This reminds me of a debate I got into with a friend of mine the other week over how easy or difficult it would be to take on a goose in a fight. I say it won't be too hard if you stand your ground and fight back. It has hollow bones and is nearly half neck. Don't be a coward and the fight's won, and you can have the thing for dinner. It's not a cassowary. Those are nightmares. But Qrow counters with something that we haven't seen since this moment. He lashes out, and a wave of what I can only assume to be aura is projected out from him, which Winter only barely evades. It doesn't appear to be dust, as its shape and behavior don't match. Something like this would allow close-range fighters like Yang or Jean to be much more effective at a distance, but they've never done anything like this.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the f*** is that?
Winter then prepares to launch herself via a glyph, and Qrow's weapon begins to transform. Now, we know that this is a scythe, very similar to RWBY's, but at the time, this was meant to spark curiosity and discussion. But before it can complete, Qrow suddenly stows his weapon and taunts Winter. His expression clearly changed beforehand, so he obviously beheld something behind Winter, which she didn't detect as she was too caught up in her vendetta.
General Ironwood, sir!
Winter charges Qrow, but is stopped by Ironwood calling out her name just before she struck Qrow's throat. Again, this is intended to be a kill shot. Both parties were using moves that were intended to end the life of the other.
What in the world do you think you're doing?
He started the altercation, sir.
That's actually not true. She attacked first.
Is that right?
Winter then lies to her commanding officer about the altercation. So not only did she participate in endangering civilian lives, but then lied to a superior officer. The punishment for that should likely be severe, to understate matters.
You liar!
But that concludes this fight. Overall, this was a mixed bag with some hits and some misses, but it really painted both Qrow and Winter as monstrously negligent regarding their lack of care for those around them. Many instances in this fight could have resulted in injury or death to bystanders, and it's only through sheer luck that this wasn't the case. But what do you think about this fight? Who had the better showing? Qrow or Winter? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Leave a like on this video if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. I would like to thank you for watching, and may you all have a weapon in each hand.